Soil School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by the Mosaic Company.
For Real Agriculture, I'm Kelvin Heppner. We are in Minnesota for this episode of the Soil School, dropping in at Trinity Creek Ranch, which includes Mikayla and Ben Tabert. And Mikayla, why don't you tell us a bit about your farm, your crop rotation, and how you incorporate cover crops into your farm here in Minnesota?
Sure, Kelvin. We farm with my parents, David and Peggy Miller, as well. They're still very active. And my grandpa would have started the operation. Used to be just mostly corn, wheat, and soybeans with some alfalfa. We do run a beef cow-calf operation with a small feedlot. Over the last probably 4 or 5 years, we've really diversified our cropping rotation. We've added in oilseed sunflowers. We grow tall fescue, which is for a turf seed, for more like lawns and golf courses. It's a really nice thing in our operation because it's great with cattle because we get a graze off of that. We have done the intercrop of the field pea and canola. That has kind of been in our rotation. I think we're going to simplify back to peas, but that was a cool crop to grow. We also do a lot of cover crops that are standalone annual cover crops, just as a grazing thing. We've tried many other crops. We have some camelina and some winter wheat seeded for next year. But overall, that's kind of what is our crop rotation. Our goal is to get a cover crop in every year wherever possible. Sometimes the perennials make that difficult, but in our northern climate, obviously that's challenging. So some of our ways that we do it has kind of been tweaked. We've tried a lot of things for sure. I would say our operation is very based off of experimentation, and we're not scared of trying things. We have cattle, so we can always graze things if that's kind of our fail-safe option. As far as how we get the cover crops in for our crop rotation, with all our diversity, we don't have a set crop rotation, but our goal is kind of this kind of sequence. So we're here in a cornfield, and obviously it came off not that long ago. We did not have time to seed a cover crop. So what we have switched to doing is interseeding, and so we try to do that around the V4 to V5 growth stage. We have a kind of a side dress that we do 28% liquid nitrogen, and while we do that pass, we're doing a cover crop. We've got 2 rows that are being drilled in that we kind of do a diverse mix. Our goal is to have something pretty much survive at that point in time, and then it's kind of ready and established that once the leaves start to drop down, we can get that cover crop to really take off. So we'll go corn. Usually our next crop would be a field pea, maybe with canola intercropped in that. And so our reason for the intercropping is to have more diversity, and the goal is to be more profitable. You obviously are going to give up some of the yield on both of those crops, but the hope is that they sum to be better. One of the reasons we're looking toward moving away from that is it's just getting too difficult to get the 2 crops to time out right with maturity, and it's not something that we won't do in the future, but we're kind of taking a break from that. Just with the kids in our family, we just have to find some simple things to do. But we'll go to peas. Usually after pea harvest, which is pretty early, we'll be able to get a pretty nice cover crop, usually something based in rye, radishes and turnips, flax, maybe a little clover if it's early enough, but that's kind of cost prohibitive. After kind of that, our hope is to be able to get in and graze that early in the spring. We actually calve in May and June, so we try to calve on a cover crop. And when we made that change, it was huge as far as labor savings, and being able to have them graze at the same time as calving has been really a nice way to calve. We treat a lot less calves for sick. We haven't treated any for 2-3 years now, which is huge. We used to treat 20 to 25 or so. So after that graze, we'll be able to seed sunflower. We kind of added sunflower in our rotation for that reason, wanting something that would be able to be seeded a little bit late and still be able to do well. We are still playing around with interseeding in the sunflower. That's another crop that's similar to corn, and that can work well. I actually did some thesis research on that and intercropping alfalfa, but we've had grasshoppers and crickets be a problem for sure. So I wouldn't say we have that figured out. So we'll have that in there. The next year we'll go to spring wheat. Obviously that harvest is pretty early, and so we'll do some sort of rye And then sometimes that's underseeded with our tall fescue, which if that's the case, we'll go in and interseed a clover either that fall or early that following spring if we can. Kind of hangs out, and then we're able to get a really good graze on that the following, like after harvest, usually by September we're in there again. And yeah, then we'll go to soybeans if we don't have the fescue. If we do, we'll do the fescue and then the soybeans. So we've tried many ways of trying to interseed cover crop or into soybeans, and we've kind of landed on it's easier just to get it combined and then go in late with rye. It's obviously very late, but rye really doesn't have to establish much and will overwinter.
Yeah.
So then we'll go back to corn. That's kind of our goal rotation.
Okay.
Anyways.
I think that's an excellent overview. Ben, Mikayla, in the middle there mentioned net profit. It's not about maximizing yield, it's about profit. That, I guess, is part of the focus here, right?
Yeah. So with the intercrop per se, you'll get maybe 60% of each, give or take. I mean, obviously the year is going to make a big difference on that. But when you add those 60% of each, you're getting still over 100%. And so you have two crops to market, so maybe one market will be better. It gives you a little more opportunity to play the markets a little bit better on that, I would say.
So what are you've been doing this for a few years, what are some of the main challenges? You just talked about some of them with the intercrop, but what about having just crop rotation and the number of different species that you have and the different timings, managing that complexity? What are some of the challenges or maybe lessons that you've learned to address some of those challenges?
Oh, we definitely don't have it all figured out. We're still learning, and like we like that. I think sometimes you have to be willing to risk a little. I mean, you don't do it on enough that you'll lose the farm. Like that's always, you have to be able to sleep at night ultimately. But as far as the cover crops, with the diversity, obviously there's a lot of herbicide restrictions as far as using those cover crops, as far as what will even grow. And then since we have cattle, we graze almost everything that we can, and so there's a lot of grazing restrictions on a lot of herbicides, and so that has really limited our options. But I think that as we've had more diversity, especially having the diverse crop rotation, we don't have the level of weed pressure. As far as using no-till and cover crops, crop canopy and just having residue is I think probably one of our bigger tools besides herbicides for managing weeds, just keeping them from germinating and growing in the first place. Having the crop rotation, we kind of have, I mean, we're still using herbicides. We're trying to put things like wheat in after sunflowers so we can kind of clean up the field. Obviously, there's going to be weeds that stick around for several years. But that's definitely something. Having your residue management is probably, I mean, that's like no-till 101. It's like the most important thing. And that's why you'll see like this corn, we don't use a chopping corn head. We cut it as high as we can because we're trying to keep that residue as evenly distributed as possible. And we don't want that residue mat of like the chopped corn that would be almost impossible to no-till into, in my opinion. Yeah, what else have we learned? What else have we learned, dear?
I mean, also, like with the corn example, like we graze everything, so it's a lot easier for cows to come into like this field where the corn is standing. They can find it, they can strip the stuff off a lot easier.
And they follow it down.
And they can follow it down. If it's all on a mat under the snow, it's a lot harder for them to find when they're digging and stuff. Whereas here, they can kind of follow the stalk and go straight down to the bottom, and then find the cover crop and down corn that would be under that too. Also,
Yeah. What types of specialized equipment have you had to introduce to your farm to implement some of these practices? You mentioned the corn head, but are there other, and I guess the in-season, when you're applying fertilizer, you're also applying seed? I guess that would be another example.
Yeah, so Ben and my dad did a great job of, they took a unit that was designed just for doing 28% liquid fertilizer, stripped the units off, and kind of did their own modification that they put 2 single disc openers between each row and used a Gandy box. We're putting seed down at the same time. So that was a big leap, and that wasn't we actually had a previous model that was like $4 or $5 grand, much cheaper, much more proof of concept. Didn't do the fertilizer at the same time, but that was kind of our baby step before we actually went in and spent the money to have a better machine that we could do the liquid fertilizer for. So that's obviously one. Having a good no-till the disc opener drill. We've got an 1890 John Deere drill, and that does a really nice job. They did actually switch the plumbing, so we're able to do paired rows in that. And so when we are doing our rye, going to corn, sunflowers, or even soybean now, we are doing the rye in twin rows, and so the other 2 paired of the 4 rows ends up being something that's not going to overwinter. It just seems to be too much rye, too much competition, it seems like, for especially the corn and the sunflowers. We have a stripper header that we use for our wheat. That was just a few years ago. Residue management was probably a big part of that. I do think that that allows the cover crops to live a little bit longer. It seems to protect it from the cold, so things will stay green a little bit longer, be able to survive a little colder.
How do you deal with wet springs? Of course, in this part of the world, tillage is quite common for drying a field out to get onto it to seed. How do you deal with that issue that I think some people would see as a major obstacle to moving in this direction?
And that is absolutely an obstacle, especially in the transition. I think as you get further in the transition, the soil can hold things a lot better. So there's a lot better trafficability. If I was a conventional grower to make the transition, I probably wouldn't transition all. I would choose a later, maybe soybeans, and all my soybeans would be no-tilled every year, and that would be my transition. Probably moisture management would be rye. That's the big one that can overwinter. We do a little bit of winter camelina in cover crops that can take up moisture, but rye is probably how our moisture management is done.
Okay. Final question then, Mikayla and Ben. And you've alluded to a bunch of these already, but just to kind of sum it up, for a farmer that is looking at moving in this direction, because there are a lot of signals right now from customers, from the market, from government even, in favor of cover crop adoption, what would you recommend as your key starting points? You've touched on some of them already, I know, but maybe sum it up for us, Mikayla.
Find someone that's doing it. Ideally as close as possible, but that's not always easy. But just someone that has maybe tried some of these things that you can bounce off ideas. Be able to sleep at night. Don't do it all, but still be willing to try something, because, you know, you've probably heard it, like Benjamin and I are almost 30, and so we've maybe got 35, 40 years of farming left. And so, I want to make those years count. Yeah. And you're not going to figure it all out in 1 year. So those are probably my big advice. Yeah.
And it's obvious that you guys like to learn and are curious and like to try new things. So I think that's something that many farmers can relate to as well. So thank you both for your time today, Mikayla and Ben.
Yeah, thank you.